She was 49 years old, and she had just asked a man she had not spoken to in 30 years what he wanted from her. It was the most honest question she had asked in longer than she could calculate, and the silence that followed it was the loudest thing in the room. Thomas Lang sat across the desk from Isabel Crane, formerly Isabel Hartley, formerly Isabel Morrow, a woman who had spent her whole life being renamed by circumstances she did not choose. And he looked at her, and she looked back, and the 30 years between them pressed against the walls of the small estate office like weather. "I haven't decided," he said. She looked at him steadily. "That is not true. You have been preparing this for 18 months. You know exactly what you want." He was quiet. "Thomas," she said. The name arrived differently than she had expected. She had not said it in 30 years. It arrived with the weight of 30 years attached. The specific gravity of a word you have kept in a locked room for a very long time and are now saying out loud and discovering it is heavier than the lock suggested. He looked at the window. He looked at the desk. He looked, finally, at her. "I want to know why," he said. 30 years ago. I want to know why." The estate office was completely still. Outside the window, the Somerset morning was doing what Somerset mornings do, producing a particular gold light that made even difficult things look briefly beautiful. Inside, two people who had been carrying something for 30 years were about to set it down. What neither of them knew yet was that the setting down would cost more than the carrying, and that it would be worth it. Stay with us. This story does not begin where you think it begins. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from physical labor, though Isabel had known plenty of that too. It comes from the sustained effort of keeping a life together by force of will when every system surrounding that life has been designed with someone else in mind. From managing accounts that were never yours to manage, making decisions that were never yours to make, and doing all of it while presenting the particular composure of a widow in reduced circumstances who has understood that gratitude is the price of survival and has been paying it season after season for 12 years. Isabel was 48 when the letter arrived. She had been managing Hartley Grange since her husband Richard died of a fever in the 3rd year of their marriage, leaving her with a 9-year-old daughter, a modest Somerset estate, and the discovery that the estate was entailed, a legal provision she had not known about, and that would not, in any practical sense, ever work in her favour. The letter was from a solicitor's office. It contained a name she had been dreading for 12 years. Mr. Gerald Crane, distant cousin to the late Richard Hartley, only surviving male heir. The entail was activating. The property would pass to him. The letter was brief. The letter from Gerald Crane himself arrived the following week and was briefer and considerably less polite. It contained, near the end, a paragraph she read 3 times to be certain she had understood it correctly. She had understood it correctly. Gerald Crane was 28 and had the specific quality of a man who had grown up knowing he would eventually inherit something and had arranged his entire character around that expectation. He was charming at dinner and agreeable in conversation, and he had a laugh that carried across rooms. What he was, underneath the charm, was acquisitive. He wanted things with the uncomplicated appetite of someone who had never had to consider what wanting costs. The arrangement also included a woman named Miss Clara Voss, whom he had been keeping in rooms in Bath for 2 years at a cost that had significantly outpaced his income. Gerald had been managing this with creative accounting and short-term debts that were beginning, by spring, to press on him. The Hartley entail was not merely an inheritance, it was a solution. He arrived at Hartley Grange on a Wednesday afternoon and sat in Isabel's drawing room and drank her tea. and looked at her with the specific look of a man assessing something he has already decided to acquire. Isabel poured tea and looked back and understood, with the clarity of a woman who has spent 12 years managing people as well as accounts, exactly what she was dealing with. She said nothing. She waited to hear the terms. The terms were delivered the following morning in the small estate office where Isabel kept her accounts, in the manner of a young man who considers unpleasant news best done briskly. 1. She could accept a small allowance and vacate the estate by midsummer. Her daughter would need to make her own arrangements. 2. They could marry. She would remain at Hartley Grange as his wife. He said, of the 20-year gap between their ages, You are not without qualities, Mrs. Hartley. I am not making the offer reluctantly." The phrasing had the quality of contempt that has been dressed in formal wear and expects not to be recognized. She recognized it. "My daughter," she said. "If we marry, what happens to my daughter?" "She would need to establish herself independently," he said. "A grown woman remaining in a household that is not, strictly speaking, her family's any longer." "Send her away," Isabel said. "Establish her elsewhere," he corrected. She made the calculation. She thought about the workhouse, which was not a figure of speech. It was a real building, and she was 48, and her savings were modest. She thought about her daughter Margaret, 21, a bright and kind, and entirely unprepared for genteel poverty. She thought about the option she was being offered, which was contemptible, and the option she was not being offered, which was worse. "I will marry you," she said, "on the condition that my daughter remains at Hartley Grange until she marries or leaves of her own accord. That is not negotiable." "Of course," he said. He said it in the manner of a man agreeing to something he has no intention of honoring. She heard this. She could not afford to say so. They married in May. That evening, in the drawing room of what was now legally Gerald Crane's house, he poured 2 glasses of wine and said, "There is something I should tell you." The sentence had the quality of something rehearsed. Isabel held her glass and waited. And he had made arrangements regarding the estate, he said. Practical arrangements. To restructure certain things. He had transferred the estate into a private holding for security, and the legal details. "Who holds it?" Isabel said. He was quiet. "Who holds it, Gerald?" He told her. The papers had been signed that morning, before the wedding. The estate had been transferred to Miss Clara Voss of Bath, as security against debts owed to her. The transfer was legal. It had been witnessed and filed with the county solicitor's office. "You married me," Isabel said very quietly, after already signing away the estate. He said the marriage was still advantageous for her, that as his wife, she had certain protections. "You should leave this room," Isabel said. He left. She sat by the fire alone on her wedding night, and looked at the flames and took stock with the methodical calm of a woman who has learned that falling apart is a luxury she cannot currently afford. The situation: legally married to a man who had defrauded her. The estate transferred before the vows. Her daughter's security unsecured. The option she had chosen over the workhouse had turned out to be, in its own way, another kind of workhouse, just with better furniture. She needed to find the solicitor who had filed that transfer. In the morning, she sent for him. She did not know, when she sent for him, who he was. She had not connected the name on the solicitor's firm to the name she had kept in a locked room for 30 years. Some connections are too painful to look for, and she had become, across a long life of painful things, quite skilled at not looking. He was announced in the hall. She heard the name. She stood in the estate office with her hands flat on the desk, breathing. Then she straightened and went out to meet him. Thomas Lang was tall and silver-templed and had the composed professional bearing of a man who had built something from the ground up across 30 years of sustained effort, and wore that building lightly because he was past the point of needing to announce it. He had been 21 when Isabel Morrow chose Richard Hartley over him. He had been the land agent's son, educated above his station through intelligence and determination, articled to a firm in Exeter, reading law since he was 18. He was going to make something of himself. This had been visible. Isabel had looked at him carefully enough to see it. She had also loved him, and he had known this. He had been certain of it the way you are certain of very few things in your life, not with the desperate certainty of hope, but with the quiet certainty of something that is simply true and does not require argument. And then the silence. No letter. No explanation. The announcement of an engagement to Richard Hartley that arrived in his life like weather, sudden and total and changing everything. He had waited 2 years for a letter, told himself she would write when she was settled, waited until the waiting became something he had to stop doing in order to keep working, and then stopped and built something else, and told himself the building was sufficient. It had not been sufficient, but it had been workable, and 30 years of workable, stacked on top of each other, it produces something that resembles a life from a distance. He had understood, 18 months ago, that the Hartley entail was about to activate. He had looked at the air. He had looked at the situation Isabel would be in when it did. And something in him, something he had been honest enough to examine, and not honest enough to fully name, had begun quietly acquiring Gerald Crane's debts. He stood now in the hall of what had been her house and looked at her, and she looked at him, and 30 years of silence took up all the air in the entrance hall simultaneously. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, and then, "Mrs. Crane." "Mr. Lang," she said, "come in." They sat across from each other in the estate office, and she showed him the transfer papers. He read them with the attention of a man who knows every word of a document because he drafted it, and is now reading it from the other side. When he finished, he set them down. She told him the timing, the morning of the wedding. She watched his face receive this. "You drafted this," she said. "Yes." "You didn't know," she said, "that the marriage was occurring the same day?" "No. I should have asked more questions. That is something I will have to account for." She accepted this and moved on. "Can it be undone?" He explained the legal picture. The transfer was clean on its face, but the circumstances might give grounds for challenge. It would require litigation, time, money. Gerald Crane had more of all three than she did. "There is," he said, "another avenue." He told her about the debts. Gerald Crane owed significantly more than the estate transfer had addressed. Thomas held a substantial portion of those notes. He called in simultaneously, they would place Gerald in insolvency. An insolvent man whose fraudulent misrepresentation in a marriage had been documented would find courts considerably less sympathetic to any claims he wished to make. "You could ruin him," Isabel said. "I could make his situation very difficult." "It is an accurate word in this context." He acknowledged this. "What do you want for it?" she said. She asked it the way she asked everything that mattered, directly, without softening it into something easier. And Thomas said, "I haven't decided." And Isabel looked at him and said, "That is not true. You have been preparing this for 18 months. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Why? The question 30 years. In the making, I want to know why, he said. 30 years ago. I want to know why. The estate office was still. The gold light came through the window. Neither of them moved. I was 18 years old, she said. I know how old you were. I know you know. I am not saying it as an excuse. I am saying it as the beginning of the true account. She looked at him steadily. My father needed the Hartley connection. The arithmetic was plain. Morrow money, Hartley name. It had been arranged before I understood it was being arranged, and by the time I understood it, the arrangement was already the shape of the future. You could have refused, he said. Yes, she said. You are right about that. I could have refused. I chose not to. He was very still. But the choosing was not the simple thing you have been thinking it was for 30 years. She looked at her hands. My mother told me things that I believed because I needed a reason that did not require me to fight. She told me you had been seen with a girl in Exeter, that the attachment was not what I thought it was from your side, that you had already moved on. There was no girl in Exeter, Thomas said. His voice was flat and precise and entirely controlled. There was no one else. There was only waiting for a letter for 2 years, and then deciding to stop waiting. I know, she said. I believed it because I wanted to, because I had already made the decision, and I needed a story to carry along with it. The wanting to believe it was the cowardice, not the choice itself. I was young, and the family needed the match, and those are real things. But the believing of something I should have questioned, that was mine. That was me choosing the easier version, because the true version required me to live with what I had done. She met his eyes. I am sorry, she said. I have been sorry for 30 years. I was a coward, and I was young, and I did not have the courage to refuse, and I did not have the courage to explain, and both of those failures cost you something they had no right to cost you. She looked at him without flinching. I am telling you this now because you asked, not because I expect it to fix anything. 30 years is a long time, and an apology at the end of 30 years is a thin thing. But it is true, and you deserve the true version. Thomas looked at her. Something in his face. The professional composure, the careful distance of a man who has been managing this room, moved. It moved the way things move when they have been held in place for a very long time, and the holding is finally released, not dramatically, but completely. I owe you something in return, he said. She waited. I have not been a good man about this, he said. Tell me. When I began acquiring Crane's debts, I told myself it was protection, that I was positioning myself to prevent harm to someone who was in a vulnerable situation. That was part of it. It was true as far as it went. He looked at the desk. But another part of it was, I had spent 30 years believing you had chosen comfort over me, chosen a better match, and discarded me without the courtesy of an explanation. And when I saw what was about to happen to you, there was something in me that found a certain satisfaction in having the power, in being the man in the room who could decide the outcome. You wanted me to need you, Isabel said. Yes, he said. I am ashamed of it. But yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 12 years. He looked up. Not because it is kind, she said, because it is true, and you said it when you did not have to. When the position you were in gave you every reason not to. She held his eyes. I have spent 30 years living with the person who chose safety over honesty. I know what that person looks like and what the choosing costs. You are not that person. Whatever else you are not that. The estate office was very quiet. What I want, he said slowly, is not what I wanted when I started this. He looked at her with the full, open expression of a man who has decided to stop managing what his face does. I wanted the power to matter, in a situation where I had mattered once and been set aside. I wanted you to know I had mattered. He paused. But sitting here, having said all of this, I find that what I actually want is considerably simpler and considerably harder. Tell me, she said. I want to help you, he said, without conditions. Not because it gives me power over the outcome, because you are in a situation that is unjust, and I have the means to address the injustice, and I want to use them for the thing they should be used for. He was still for a moment. And I would like, if it is possible, to not end this conversation the way the last one ended, with silence, with nothing said, with 30 more years of not knowing what the other one was thinking. Isabel looked at him for a long time. He looked back. Then let us not end it that way, she said. What happened to Gerald Crane was not dramatic. It was legal and measured and considerably more thorough than dramatic. Thomas called in the debts with precision, which ones and in which order, because a man who had spent 30 years building a legal practice from the ground up did not abandon precision in the moment it was most required. The called debts created a pressure that made Gerald Crane's position untenable. The documentation of his conduct, the transfer papers dated the morning of the wedding, showed the representations he had made to Isabel about her security, provided a picture of a man whose financial dealings had been characterized by misrepresentation that made him a poor counterparty to any future arrangements. Miss Voss, who was a practical woman and had not been told the full details of how the estate had been acquired, found her position considerably more complicated than she had been led to believe. Her solicitor and Thomas's solicitor had several conversations. Those conversations produced a negotiated outcome. The estate transfer was unwound. The legal documentation took 3 months, but at the end of it, Hartley Grange was in a holding Thomas had established on Isabel's behalf. Not Gerald Crane's, not Miss Voss's, not Thomas's own. Gerald Crane left Somerset in August. The precise nature of his departure was discussed in the county for several months before something more interesting replaced it. He did not contest the annulment. The annulment took 8 months. When it was granted, Isabel was 49 and free of a marriage that had lasted 5 months and cost her considerably, and the estate was hers in a legal sense it had never quite been before. Margaret, her daughter, remained at Hartley Grange throughout. She told her mother one evening in October, sitting by the fire, that she thought Mr. Lang was a good man. Yes, Isabel said. You knew him before. A long time ago. Before father? Yes. Do you think he's still— Margaret, Isabel said. I am only asking. I know what you are asking. Isabel looked at the fire. I do not know yet. There are things that still need to be said. Some things, once a great deal of time has passed, cannot simply be resumed. They have to be rebuilt, if they can be rebuilt at all. Margaret was quiet. She was old enough to understand that some conversations were not hers to finish. It was Thomas who proposed the cottage. Not as a romantic gesture. Nothing between them moved at the speed of gesture. It moved at the speed of 2 people who have been burned by the past and have learned to be careful, who are rebuilding something that was damaged not by malice, but by fear and circumstance, and the particular cruelty of a world that does not make it easy for people to choose what they actually want. The cottage belonged to him, a small, well-built place on the edge of a village 4 miles from Taunton, with a garden that had been maintained by a tenant who had cared about it, and an apple tree in the back that was old enough to have opinions about the weather. He asked if she would like to see it. She said yes. They went on a Saturday in November, which was not warm but was clear, the Somerset light doing what it does with autumn afternoons, making the fields look as though they were lit from underneath. They walked through the cottage. They walked through the garden. Then they stood at the gate looking out at the lane and the fields beyond. "It needs work," Thomas said. "Everything needs work," Isabel said. "That is not a reason not to undertake it." He looked at her sideways, not with the careful professional look of the estate office, with something older and simpler and considerably less managed. "I mean the cottage," he said. "I know what you mean," she said. The lane was quiet. The fields were the amber grey of late autumn. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "I am 51 years old," Thomas said, "and I have spent every year since 21 building a life around the absence of a specific thing. The life is good. It has been full in various ways. I do not want to pretend otherwise." He looked at the garden. "But the absence is still there, and I am no longer interested in building around it." Isabel looked at the lane, at the fields, at the November light. "I am 49, she said, "and I have been making the practical calculation for so long that I have forgotten what it feels like to make the other kind." She paused. "I am not sure I still know how." "I think we would have to learn together," he said, it seems like the kind of thing that could be learned." She looked at him, and he looked back. The afternoon was what it was, and they were both older than they had been when this began, and younger than they felt on the days when everything had been at its worst. "Thomas?" she said. "Yes." "I am not the girl who left without explanation." She held his eyes. "And you are not the young man who waited for a letter that never came. We are both considerably more complicated than those people, and I think we should say that clearly before we say anything else." "I agree," he said. "I am also not finished being angry about what Gerald Crane did, or about the entail, or about the 30 years of managing things that were never going to be quite right, or about my mother, who is long dead and beyond accounting, but whom I am still, at 49, occasionally furious with." She looked at him directly. "I am not a simple proposition." "No," he said. "You never were." And the way he said it was not a complaint. She looked at the cottage, at the garden, at the lane. "I would like to see this garden in spring," she said, "before any decisions are made. I would like to see what it does." "That seems sensible," he said. "And I would like to have several more conversations like the ones we had in the estate office, where we both say the true thing instead of the manageable thing. Also, sensible." "And then," she said, "when we have done those things, and know what the garden does, and have said the true things, then we will see." "Then we will see," he agreed. She took his arm on the walk back to the lane, not as a declaration, because it was cold, and because 30 years is long enough for an explanation, and what needed to be said had been said, and some things do not require further announcement. Spring. Then September. The garden was extraordinary in spring. The previous tenant had planted with the long-term thinking of someone who intended to stay. Roses along the east wall, a kitchen garden in practical rows, and the apple tree that produced according to its own judgment about the weather, which turned out to be sound. Isabel came in March and in April, and both times Thomas came with her. And they walked through the garden and talked about everything except the thing they were also talking about, until they were not talking around it anymore. and the decision had made itself in the way decisions make themselves when people stop fighting what they already know. In May, among the open roses, Thomas asked Isabel to marry him. Or he had prepared a speech and abandoned it. He said, "I would like to not be waiting for something that is already here, if you are willing." She said, "I am willing." Directly, without softening, with the full weight of what it meant behind it. They were married quietly in September, in the small church in the village, with Margaret as witness. The cottage had been made ready across the summer. The work Thomas had mentioned, the rooms attended to, the kitchen shelving supplemented because Isabel had opinions about it, and Thomas had learned, relearning what he had once known, that her opinions about things were one of the qualities he had forgotten he loved and had been rediscovering one conversation at a time. The first evening in the cottage was October, the first real autumn cold coming down from the hills. Thomas made a fire. Isabel made tea. They sat by it in the room that was theirs, in the particular way that rooms become yours when you have chosen them. Not inherited them, not been cornered into them, not managed them for someone else. "I should tell you something," Isabel said. "Tell me." "The last time I sat by a fire on a first night in a house, I was alone. I had just been told that the house I had agreed to stay in had already been signed away." She looked at the fire. "I sat there, and I did not cry. I was proud of that at the time. I now think it was the wrong response. I think I should have cried. I think the not crying was the last piece of 12 years of holding everything together, whether it was possible to hold or not." Thomas looked at her. "I am not going to hold everything together tonight," she said. "I am going to sit here with my tea by my own fire in my own house and feel the full weight of all of it, the 30 years and the 12 years and the 5 months and the annulment and all of the calculations I made that I should not have had to make." She looked at him. "I wanted you to know that is what I am doing, so that you know." "I know," he said. He put his hand over hers. He did not say anything else. He did not need to say anything else. The fire did what fires do. The cottage settled around them. Outside, the October night was quiet and cold and clear, with the stars, the particular bright of stars, seen through autumn air. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Neither of them needed to. Actually, this was the thing that had been missing from every room of the past 30 years. The specific peace of a silence that does not require management. The silence between two people who have said the true things and are now resting in the aftermath of truth, which is quieter and warmer and more durable than anything either of them had expected. The apple tree in the garden had finished its season. The roses were done until next year. The kitchen garden had been put to bed with the care of someone who knows it will come back in spring. The most optimistic act available to a person in October, and one which Isabel intended to repeat every year for as long as her hands worked. The fire burned. The tea was warm. The room was theirs. The cruel bargain was this: a woman of 48, managing something that was never fully hers. Accepting a marriage, she did not want to prevent an outcome she could not afford. Offered by a man who was not a villain in the dramatic sense, simply a man who wanted things and used the mechanisms available to him, which is a kind of cruelty the world rarely names as cruelty because it is so common. The crueler bargain was the one made 30 years before. A girl of 18, told the person she loved, had moved on, choosing the practical option over the true one, and spending 30 years living inside the choice. But listen. The girl became a woman who managed 12 years of difficulty without breaking, who sat on a wedding night in a house that had been signed away and did not cry, and who eventually, at 49, in a cottage that was actually hers, allowed herself to feel the weight of all of it and put it down. And the young man who waited for a letter that never came became a man who spent 30 years carrying a resentment he was honest enough to name, and big enough, in the end, to choose against. Who sat across a desk from the woman he had never stopped loving and said the shameful thing because the shameful thing was true, and because choosing truth over dignity is the only version of dignity worth having. That is not a small thing. That is the hardest thing. Harder than the entail and the ultimatum and the fraudulent marriage and the annulment. Harder than the legal mechanisms and the called-in debts. The hardest thing was the tea by the fire, the hand over the folded hands, the silence that did not need to be managed. The hardest thing was choosing it, when choosing it was finally possible, and allowing themselves to believe it was allowed. They were both old enough to know it might not last as long as they wanted, old enough to hold that knowledge and choose the fire anyway. That is the only kind of courage that matters in the end. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that chooses forgiveness over bitterness, not because bitterness was not earned, but because forgiveness is the better life. If this story found something in you, if the estate office confession made you hold your breath, if the cottage in November made something ease, then you know why we tell these stories. We tell them because the second chance is real, because the truth said late is better than the truth never said, because some gardens are extraordinary in spring, and some fires burn warm in October, and some silences, after enough true things have finally been spoken, are the right kind. Subscribe. Come back. Tell someone who needs this story that it exists. We will be here. There are always more rooms to sit in, more fires to build, more true things waiting to be said.